One of the big hangups for people that have tuned into this point and want to cut down on carbs and include more animal products and less carbohydrates from plants is what you just touched on, saturated fat. Talk about why that is a myth and people don't need to fear that.
First of all, some facts about fat. So, if you go back to when I was talking about macronutrients at the beginning, so the only 100% carbohydrate on the planet is sucrose. And then at the other end, the 100% fats are your oils. So, whether it's coconut oil or olive oil or sunflower oil, your oils are 100% fat. So, even butter isn't 100% fat, it's got some protein and it's got some water in. So, you've then got that sort of middle group that's got protein in it. But in that middle group, having said you've got carb proteins and you've got fat proteins, nature puts a trace of fat in virtually everything. So even the carb proteins have got a trace of fat, not enough to make those foods craveable or moreish or to upset the sort of the whole, insulin, not eating carbs and fats at the same time, but just a trace. And then you sort of think, well, why would nature put a trace of fat in every single food on the planet other than sucrose if somehow it were trying to kill us? And the second interesting factoid about fat is that every single food that contains fat contains all three fats: saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. So you have dietitians say things like, oh, meat is full of saturated fat. It's like, no, it's not. Take a typical steak from the United States Department of Agriculture database, put 100 grams of steak in front of you raw, so it's not affected by cooking. 71% of it is water. 21% of it is protein. You've got about 1% of ash and minerals, 7% is fat. Of those 7 percentage points that are fat, 2 are saturated fat. So the main fat in meat is not saturated fat. The main fat in meat is usually monounsaturated fat. I can't find one meat where you've got more saturated fat than mono and poly added together. And usually the single highest fat is the monounsaturated fat. So the third interesting fact about fat is the only food group that's got more saturated fat than unsaturated fat is dairy products. So milk, even if it's low fat, is going to have more saturated than unsaturated fat. Not because saturated is bad and the other is good, but just to state a nutritional fact. So when you realize that even strawberries have got a trace of fat in them, which means they've got a trace of saturated fat in them, if you honest to God think that nature puts saturated fat in every single food on this planet because somehow it's trying to kill us, then you've lost the plot. There's nothing in real food that is trying to kill us. There just isn't. I mean, it's just literally insane. So my PhD, this is then in my home turf, because my PhD was looking back to say I was fascinated by obesity. So, obesity took off like an airplane in the US in the late 1970s, in the UK in the early 1980s. You look back, what happened at that time? We changed our dietary guidelines. What did we do? We put in a guideline. This is good, actually. We're going to come full circle just before the end. We put in a guideline that said, thou shalt have no more than 30% of those calories in the form of fat, which was the thing that then made it so that we have to eat 55% of our diet in the form of carbohydrate. But I looked at what the evidence base was for that guideline, 30% total fat. And then there was a secondary guideline, which was you should have no more than 10% of your calories in the form of saturated fat. So I went back to say, so my PhD basically said, in fact, that's my PhD title, that's my PhD in the camera, that's my PhD in the form of a book. And I basically went back to say, okay, if I were the dietary guideline committee at the time, let's say I'm there 1977 in the US, 1983 in the UK, what evidence is available to me? And I'm going to use the modern technique of systematic review and meta-analysis. So there's no cherry picking. I'm going to look at what were the randomized control trials available at the time, and there were only 6. What were the epidemiological studies that were available at the time? That I think there was only 6 of those as well. Um, Pull all of that evidence together in meta-analysis. So again, there's no cherry picking. And did it provide support for the introduction of those 2 dietary fat guidelines? And to cut to the chase, the answer is no. None whatsoever. Not even a little tiny, just none. Just none literally whatsoever. So then I said, okay, that was then. I'm actually doing my PhD in 2016. So we've had other studies since then. We've had the Women's Health Initiative as a randomized control trial. We've had the Minnesota Coronary Survey, more epidemiological studies, the eBray study. bring it up to date. Let's pull all of the evidence that we've got available at the time we're doing the PhD. Was there any more evidence for the 30% fat, 10% saturated fat? Cut to the chase, the answer is no. Still no further evidence. And the final paper from my PhD, because you should put your own research in the context of other people's research, was, of course, to say I wasn't the only person who looked at this. There were, I think, 7 other teams. When you publish a paper, you've got a number of findings. So let's say my first paper would have a finding for all-cause mortality, for total fat, all-cause mortality, saturated fat, heart disease, deaths, total fat, heart disease, death, saturated fat. So that would be 4 findings. So across these 7 teams, there were 40 different findings, and 37 of them found nothing. Now, one of them found, the Chowdhury 2014 study found that trans fats was a problem. None of us would disagree with that. We would all say trans fats are pretty evil. And then the only actual finding was there was a study from Hooper, which was the one that the government wanted to rely on. And then they just repeated the same study. So the same team, it was basically the same finding. So you're down to 1 finding in 40. And if I can, I can remember it. They said, we found an association with CVD events and saturated fat, but we found nothing for all-cause mortality, nothing for CVD mortality, nothing for CHD mortality, nothing for strokes, nothing for myocardial infarctions, nothing. Oh, but we had this one finding, so we're going to trumpet that from the rooftops. So the totality of the evidence is basically naff all. But people don't know that. It's like the fiber thing. When it becomes ingrained as part of the nutritional mythology, you could stop 100 people in your local town and say, is fat bad for you? And they would say, yes. And then you'd say, what's the evidence behind that? They wouldn't know. If you say to them, what is saturated fat? They wouldn't know. If they say, what is saturated fat found in? They wouldn't know. Is do strawberries contain saturated fat? They will probably say no. Is meat full of saturated fat? They would probably say yes. Yeah, they have absolutely not a flipping clue. And that's where we are with nutrition.
What do you think it's going to take to change it?
I think of it as a pyramid, not the food pyramid, but as a pyramid. And the best way to change it, the one that would have the biggest impact on the most people, would be for dietary guidelines to change, which is what Nina Teicholz has been trying to achieve over a number of years. Much as I love Nina and much as I would love her to succeed, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's ever going to happen, because they would have to admit how wrong they got it. And I think they would open themselves up for lawsuits. It's kind of like, what do you mean I shouldn't be having 55% of my diet in the form of carbohydrate? Are you now telling me that's what made me obese and type 2 diabetic and probably clogged up my arteries and gave me sort of carcinogenic propensity? It would be too dangerous. They'd have too many lawsuits. So that's not going to happen. What is happening is what we're a part of, which is the bottom up revolution. So people get to the point that they feel bad. The number one reason for walking into the family doctor is tired all the time. And people walk in and say, Doc, I just feel tired all the time. And a lot of people go through their whole life and waste their whole life feeling tired all the time. And then a number of people will go online and just say, this isn't right. And then they'll come across your podcast or they'll come across a book and they'll say, wow, these people seem to have a lot of energy and they're looking good and they're looking slim and they've got nice looking skin and they look pretty healthy. I fancy me some of that. What are they doing? So the bottom up revolution is individuals taking charge of their own health. And that then spreads. And it spreads in quite a good ratio. So one person might influence 2 people, those might influence 2 people, and suddenly you've got the money on the chessboard. And it can be quite powerful because people see somebody, it's like, whoa, you've lost 50 pounds. You look great. Yeah. And I've reversed my type 2 diabetes. Wow. How did you do that? And a lot of people are getting into this field because of type 2 diabetes, because they're starting to realize my eyesight's going. And I hear that if I don't get my sugars under control, I might be looking at amputations in 10 years' time. And that really scares people into action. In terms of, I used to be an HR director in my first life and now doing what I do, what motivates people has been a consistent fascination through those 2 careers. There's only 2 things that motivate people. You move towards pleasure and you move away from pain, and that's it. And the most powerful motivator by far is moving away from pain. So if you're in a burning building, you will get out of the building a lot faster than you would if you're in the building and it's a nice day and you think, oh, it'd be nice to be outside. Pain is much stronger than pleasure. So it's not until a lot of people get type 2 diabetes, or they get to the point that they can't play with their children, they can't bend down on the floor, that they actually realize, I need to do something about this now. They look around, they realize that the guidelines have failed them, eating less has failed them, it's just made them fatter and sicker. And if they're lucky, they come across one of us and they come into this healthy world and take control and feel great, and then feel a little bit annoyed that they had to find this out for themselves and then become disciples and tell lots of other people. The most powerful bit is if you imagine there's a sort of line in the middle bit of the pyramid, and that's doctors. And that's who we need to get to, because for every person you convert their family and a few friends. For every doctor you can convert 1,000 patients. They are the really, really powerful ones. So, if people say, oh, will you come and speak? Because I don't charge. If people say, will you come and do a talk? I'll say it depends who the audience is. And I would sooner talk to 10 health professionals, let's say, than 500 non health professionals, because you know that those 10 health professionals might each influence another 1,000 people if you can get them on board. So that's the middle layer that we've got to go after. I mean, Nina, please plow on, do what you're doing. If nothing else, you're putting it on the record that you were told this is making people obese and diabetic. You can't, it's going to be like the cigarette companies one day. When they all, that famous footage where all 7 of them are lined up in a courtroom saying, oh, I never knew it was carcinogenic. No, I never knew smoking was carcinogenic. And they all swear an oath. And then somebody produces the paper that says, actually, you did know, because this document was shared with you beforehand, and then suddenly they've all committed a crime. So she's putting them on notice that you are committing a crime against health and humanity. But they won't stop. We've got to get to doctors, and we've got to keep doing what we're doing with individuals.
Have you seen a positive shift in the last number of years that people are hearing this message and it's resonating?
Yeah, what I am seeing, it's quite interesting. So the narrative is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the narrative is getting more anti-meat, more plant-based. They've almost given up sometimes on the nutrition message. Even if you get a paper now saying, "Oh, red meat is going to give," I mean, that one in November, red meat is going to give you diabetes. I mean, for crying out loud, how? When did red meat ever come with glucose? Oh, when it has a burger and a bun with it and a fizzy drink. Okay, now that might be the mechanism. But they come out with the most stupid things. But now more and more, the papers are nutrition and the environment, because, cows burp and that's going to cause global warming. I mean, I tweeted something yesterday, I put a picture of ultra processed food. Somebody had done this great photo with about 1,000 ultra processed foods in this little sort of 3 by 2 inch diagram, and it's like, yeah, and cows are the problem. I mean, come on, guys. But they're increasingly put it in environmental terms. The message that animals are bad, plants are good, is as relentless as ever. It's absolutely relentless. I mean, what I do every week is analyze an academic paper in the literature. My positioning is I do it so that you don't have to. You'll get 5, 6, 7 executive summary bullet points you can read in 2 minutes, and you've got the measure of the whole latest bit of nonsense that you've seen in Medscape or the New York Times or Washington Post or whatever. But they're thick and fast. I can't even keep up with the nonsense that I should dissect. But at the same time, more and more people are taking their health into their own hands and realizing that how we're being told to eat is not making them feel good. And the internet has enabled this. It's woken people up. You don't have to go to a conference. You just go online and say, I don't know, I don't feel well, and something might pop up, and you might go down a rabbit hole, and you might come across someone, and you might watch a video and it will change your life. People remember where they were, like I remember where I was at that Western Price conference when I took on board a message that I knew was going to change my own health and my own diet.
And a beautiful thing about this, everything we shared today, for somebody that it's brand new information, it can be overwhelming, but it is all very simple. It's not going to be easy because everybody has ingrained habits and their ways, but nothing we've said is overly complex and people can do this on their own for the most part. Unless the interesting part is if they're on medications, that's when things can get tricky and they need to be careful as they're healing
Mm.
if they were given dosages while they were unhealthy. But that's a side point. The point I'm trying to make is that this is straightforward, foundational, and there is hope for people. So if they do tune into something like this, there is hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the difference in how you feel when you're not eating the amount of carbohydrate that they want you to eat, when you don't have a carb hangover the next morning, when you don't have these fluctuations in energy, when you are in ketosis at some point in the day and you don't feel hungry and you feel you're working really well and you can power through if you're making a breakthrough in your work or something. Um, that should be available to everyone. The idea that it isn't, it's just criminal. It really is. They're harming people. And of course, big food, people sometimes joke and say, is big food working with big pharma? Well, it might as well be because the food makes you sick and then the drugs are supposed to mop up making you sick. I mean, how many people are on omeprazole or whatever? Antacids, the stomach is the most acidic environment on the planet. Why would you want to make it less acidic? If you've got stomach problems, it's not acidic enough. So maybe think about having apple cider vinegar, but whatever you do, don't start chucking and acids into it. And then, statins, let's stop the body doing what it's designed to do. It's designed to produce cholesterol. It doesn't rely on you having to eat cholesterol. It's so important. It produces it for you. So we, in our infinite wisdom, say, well, let's block that pathway. It's called the mevalonate pathway. Let's block it. Let's block it right up at the top, at the HMG reductase enzyme level. And, okay, CoQ10 is further downstream. That's the body's energy spark plug. Oh, never mind. Um, See how that goes. We play God. We think we've hijacked the brain's neurotransmitter pathway or something. Again, on my site, if you put in antidepressants in the search box, there's an incredible article, September 22, published in The Lancet, where a team had said, we assume that antidepressants are working by the serotonin reuptake inhibition, but are they? And they asked 6 or 7, I think it was, brilliant research questions. And they said, okay, let's test each one. The answer to that one is no. The answer to that one is no. The answer to that one is no. It was an incredible piece of research, completely blowing away the whole rationale for antidepressants. And I would wager you probably never heard of it. And nor have most people who take antidepressants, because it's not in the interest of the drug company that that stuff ever becomes known. I'm surprised it was even published, quite frankly, because usually that kind of research doesn't get funded or published.
So much of it is just so backwards, which takes me back to you brought up the meat and diabetes study that's relatively new. The interesting thing is if you flip that around, consuming less carbs and upping your meat is going to come back to what we talked about before. You're going to bring down your blood glucose, bring down your insulin, and you're going to go further and further from type 2 diabetes, following the opposite of what that science says.
Exactly. I mean, it's gone from just being wrong to being upside down wrong. Eat plants, no, eat animal foods. It's just upside down wrong.
But again, there is hope in all of this, and the message is relatively straightforward and simple.
Yeah. So
So we'll leave it at that for people. The fact that, we don't want to leave on doom and gloom because there
no,
is a
no,
lot of
no.
hope here and a lot
Yeah.
of, since we are sort of at rock bottom, there's only really going up from here. And people are tuning into what they need to do and taking the power back in their own hands. You mentioned the internet. It's just such a powerful tool for people to realize these alternative narratives. So there is hope.
I mean, for me, it's really easy, and these are the messages that I will present. Yeah, I always put the slide in. Okay, what should we eat? I've told you what they've got wrong, but I'm going to tell you what you should eat. Number one, eat real food. That's where we started. Number two, choose that food for the nutrients it provides. So when you know about essential fats, complete protein, vitamins, and minerals, they are found in meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And then number three, eat a maximum of 3 times a day. Okay, I eat 4 times a day because I'm having this lockdown chocolate mousse and the world still hasn't gone completely non-mad. So I still have it, but I don't have a weight problem. I don't have diabetes, so I don't care kind of thing. In fact, if anything, I probably need to keep my weight up. But if you're trying to do anything about weight, it's a really good idea to eat a maximum of 3 times a day. If you don't like breakfast, don't have it. But don't do this grazing thing that dietitians tell you to do. That cows graze all day long and look at the size of them. That's not going to work well. But it is really easy and you can do it. And it's going to make you feel so much better that your only regret will be that you wished you'd done it sooner. That'll be the only regret.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
There are no essential carbohydrates whatsoever. None. Zilch, zippo. Telling people to have at least 55% of their diet in the form of the one macronutrient that we don't even need is the starting point that's wrong. You think snacking on an apple is super healthy.